today's face-off on Fox Soul, challengers Quan LX and Big Angry Adams ready to go blow by blow on those hot topics. Face-off on Fox Soul starts right now.
Eric and Lyle Menendez are rethinking their strategy for release after both were denied parole last week. Two separate parole panels ruled that they should stay behind bars, citing disciplinary violations and questions about their behavior. Their attorney, Mark Garagos, he joins me now live. Thank you so much for being with me. You joined me live and my colleague Phil Schuman exclusively Friday night after this. We got your reaction. We want to talk to you now about next steps moving forward. Let me just start with the fact that they were both denied, and ultimately the parole members said they characterized them as having antisocial personality traits. You disagree with that?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think I said to you, maybe somebody else, when you talk about personality traits, everybody since Mother Teresa has died has got antisocial personality traits of some kind. So that isn't really the way I would characterize what the denials were. The denial of Eric was, I thought, markedly different than what happened with Lyle. With Eric, that commissioner, Mr. Barton, came out of the gate and appeared to have his mind made up, focused on the crime itself, and to the extent that Eric, over the last 12 years, has shown a remarkable ability to do really good things with no hope for over a decade, was completely ignored. And the purported cell phone violations bore absolutely no connection to criminality. So that was perplexing. Then when you move over to Lyle, which was the next day, last Friday, that Commissioner Garland later characterized in her hearing with Lyle, the worst day of her professional career. Well, what was she referring to? While they were denying both Eric and Lyle their freedom over cell phone violations, which are rules internal to the prison itself had to admit, because we confronted them after at first they blamed the victims, they admitted they erroneously violated the rules and released the audio.
In this round, here's Charles Big Angry Adams.
Well, that was some wonderful. I always like it when I listen to a fellow lawyer give out a steaming pile of BS in a very believable, straightforward manner, where he's talking about he seemed offended that the parole board was focused on the crime itself, right? Like taking a shotgun and blowing your mother's face off, right? This is exactly what you want a parole board to do, is to look at the horrifying crime as to why the person's in prison and sentenced to life in prison, and see if there's someone, when Mark Garagos tried to say, oh, well, everybody has antisocial personality disorders since Mother Teresa died. Well, that was just Garagos lying through his slimy teeth, right? It's disgusting the way some people in my profession have a capacity to lie without any hesitation. No, not everyone has personality disorders, and most certainly not the type of personality disorders that lead you to butcher your parents. Now, there is this narrative from the Menendez brothers, right, that they used during the trial that did not emerge before, that they were being molested by their dad, and that's what led them to commit these horrible crimes. The problem that most of us think is, one, Eric was seeing a psychologist, and it was actually the psychologist who he admitted the crime to who told the police and led to the prosecution. And there was no mention, right? No mention of being sexually molested by his father. And in fact, to the contrary, after they committed these grievous murders, which were alleged to, there is some allegation that they committed these murders and then destroyed a new will that the parents had done that reflected the fact that they were disappointed with their son's conduct, right? And took all the money they could get their hands on, and sports cars. One of them was allegedly bought a sports bar restaurant in Princeton, near Princeton, where they went to school in New Jersey, and were just living this fast and fabulous, getting floor seats to the Lakers, were living this big time life, which of course brought some attention to them because, well, it was evil drug dealers that were suggested to have killed their parents. But the truth is that these two scumbag monsters killed their parents, and in a horrifying manner, especially with the mother. And then, at a later date, when they were caught red-handed and they realized, and hopefully it was them, not their lawyers, because lawyers aren't supposed to come up with stories. And obviously Garagos wasn't the lawyer then. They're not supposed to say, hey, we should argue this, right? Because that would be suborning perjury. So I presume that the Menendez brothers were the ones that came up with the theory that daddy was touching us, right? And it sounds like instead, very good parents who spent a whole lot of money providing a tremendous platform for those two young men. They're not young anymore, but at the time, to have tremendous success in life. And instead, they chose to be a couple of party boys. And when it looked like the party was running out of steam, they butchered their parents in the worst possible way. And, from my perspective, I think most murders are awful. There are some people that bring a killing on themselves, like self-defense or other things. But when you have two people that have been given every advantage in life, every advantage, grew up rich, grew up, private schools, private lessons, private colleges, just the best of everything. And then they do something horrible. It's absolutely inexcusable. And it's the only reason those two preppy kids caught the nation's attention.
But
And
all
it's
of
the only
that,
reason we're talking about it now.
but all
Let
of
them
that,
rot in prison.
but all of that means absolutely nothing if it is true that that father repeatedly raped his sons. If it is true that the young man in the very popular boy male group that his father managed in that music group, who has passed several lie detectors in support of the Menendez brothers, that their father repeatedly raped him also. If it is true that the mother was aware of this and the mother told the boys to keep it quiet, and the mothers helped the father groom the boys to accept the sexual abuse of their father, if that is true, then the mother and the father both deserve the bullet. Because I am a father and I have raised children. And any father, if you rape your child, the punishment should be death, not a prison cell. If you a mother that covered up the sexual abuse and exploitation of your sons or daughters to keep a man, God damn it, you deserve death and not a prison also. Put them both in the graveyard. But if they're both lying about it, then they should rot in prison. But if it is true and evidence is being uncovered continuously that suggests that it was true, and there's more evidence about a journal that was discovered that talked about the boys confessing in the journal of their father's sexual abuse of them when they were young boys in that journal. If that is true, I don't give nothing about how sweet of a life they had being raised, how much privilege they were grown up with. That does not equal the sexual trauma and the butchering of the innocence of two young boys by the very person that is supposed to protect them at all costs, their father and their mother. So all that you're talking about don't mean a damn thing if that is true that they raped those boys.
Well, I actually think it does, right? Because you look at direct and circumstantial evidence, right? And if you are willing to admit a murder to a psychologist, which is ultimately was the linchpin in their prosecution, which Eric did, why would you hold back the relevant information as to why you committed the murder? Because Eric, they weren't children at the time. And if you're opening up about one thing, and also if that's the why, right? If that's the why didn't any of this evidence emerge earlier? If that's the why, right? Why?
The prosecutors knew about the journal. The prosecutors knew about the journal.
Hold on.
And they hid it.
The prosecutors did not hide evidence. In fact, the prosecutors were very open about this. They were able to present it, and ultimately, the jury rejected the arguments. They said, "We don't believe this nonsense. We believe that you were just two party boys," which is what they were, and you took all the money and had the big party, and you did it when people would typically be mourning the death of their parents, or be
But what
explaining
about the
that we
boy
committed
band
this
member
crime.
from the very popular teenage boy group who passed a polygraph examination twice, admitting that the father did the same exact things to him?
Right. Again, there is no solid evidence that the father molested him or anyone else. And how horrible to demonize, right? This is what getting this jihad, this we get all slathered up nowadays. It was like the I'm trying to think of the Muslim fella in I think Virginia or Maryland that killed his ex-girlfriend classmate, and they did this huge podcast on it, and they got him out of jail. It was Maryland, a corrupt DA, and it turned out he is the murderer, right? It's just all nonsense, right? And the Menendez brothers, even you're trying to build a case to justify, okay, so your father's a molester and you killed him, right? Then why did you go put a shotgun and shoot your mom's face off?
Because they
Right?
said the mom
I
knew
know
about
there's a
it,
story and
and they
excuse, but
said
that's
the
just
mom
lawyer
groomed them to keep
bullcrap.
it quiet, and the mom taught them to accept it and that it was normal. If they're lying, they should rot their ass in prison.
Okay.
Absolutely should. If they're lying,
Well, the
they
jury didn't believe them.
They should have got the death penalty if they're lying. But if they
Well,
tell the truth,
well, I mean, it's California.
committed no
They ain't
crime.
doling that out. But the jury did not believe that they were victims of child molestation. They thought that was just a contrived lie in an effort to obfuscate
you
their
would be
their
shocked
culpability.
at how many kids, when they see psychiatrists for being victims of sexual abuse, they don't reveal everything about it. They keep a lot to themselves.
Again, not a kid when he went to the psychologist, right? Admitted to committing a murder and talking about why he committed the murder.
To me,
Say,
you can't rehabilitate rapists.
MAGA influencer was on Newsnight last week, and we were having a discussion on the show about Trump's attempts to influence parts of American culture, like the Smithsonian, like the Kennedy Center, and the arts, when suddenly the conversation turned to slavery and race. And Jillian argued that everything in the culture has become now about race.
He's not whitewashing slavery. So
he's not?
He's not. No,
Okay.
he's not. And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does.
Then what really shocked all of us at the table was that she seemed to try to be minimizing the impact of racism and slavery on American history.
Do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans own slaves?
But it was a system of white
Do
supremacy.
you realize that slavery
African-Americans
is
were
thousands
slaves
of
and
years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race
I
to
didn't
try
realize
to
this was
end
controversial.
slavery?
That's an incredibly misleading statistic, because even the Americans who did not own slaves also participated in slavery by benefiting from the economic system of slavery, the political system of slavery, and culturally treating Black people as if they were not human. But Jillian didn't acknowledge any of those things, and that, I think, is really what shocked so many of us.
Unfortunately, I ended up having two conversations at the same time. So the first one has to do with the Smithsonian and the exhibits. I was told by the comms team at the White House that the administration had taken umbrage with. So I knew this was going to come up, and I wanted to speak in an educated fashion on what the true issues were. So I reached out to the comms team and I was like, can you just tell me, right, like what's going on? They send me, I don't know, a 50-page document. And there were numerous exhibits, none of which had anything to do with slavery. So when Julie Rodzinski, who is another woman on the panel, starts to talk about how parts of MAGA are racist and makes a Nazi reference to Trump again by calling him dear leader, I know that none of it has to do with slavery. So I'm like, oh boy, here we go. You know, I'm thinking she's pitching it right over the plate. I'm going to knock it out of the park because none of it has to do with that at all, which is why I very confidently was like, he's not whitewashing slavery. I very confidently take the position that he's not whitewashing slavery because I know that none of the exhibits are actually about.
In this round, here's Charles Big Angry Adams.
So what we have is fitness influencer and reality TV star Jillian Michaels and Abby Phillip, who hosts a roundtable discussion on CNN, and some of our other panel members got into it with Jillian about her take on Trump's efforts to limit which some people would frame the abject white hatred and blame white people for everything and frame everything in the context of racism, everything, right? In fact, in academia, in elite academia, the best way to ensure that you get published nowadays is to call something that has nothing to do with race racist, right? That's a guaranteed way to get published, right? And we have had this mindset in the last 3 decades of how academia can articulate why America is awful. And that has rolled downstream into a number of areas, including many museums. And in the Smithsonian, it does have an incredible anti-American sentiment. Now, we obviously do have an entire other museum in DC set up to talk about the horrors of slavery. And there are clearly appropriate places to discuss the horrors of slavery in the context, and racism in the context of the Smithsonian. But what you've had done is you've had it injected everywhere. And just like Abby Phillip did, right? Now, I think Jillian Michael was wrong. I think at the apex, I think you had about 8% of Americans owning slaves. And that, yes, you had a culture of Jim Crow and after the fall of the Confederacy, and they were all really, really awful. What Abby Phillip ignored, of course, which much like you ignore, is that 600,000 white Americans died fighting to end slavery, that we had abolitionists at the very beginning of this country in 1776, that this country almost didn't come to existence, but the fact that they had to compromise on slavery issues. There were white Americans that from the beginning of this country who said slavery is a horrible institution, right? And we also pretend, Abby Phillip and a great number of people like to pretend, that slavery was somehow exclusively the province of, white people from Europe, when of course that's not at all the truth. And in fact, the only places that legalized slavery, I know you say, oh, it still exists in America, but that's just you lying. The only place that it still exists openly, throughout Africa, especially North Africa and South Asia, and China, but China's just a totalitarian, authoritarian communist regime. And that's where you have actual slavery still, right? And none of it is white. And in fact, throughout history, you've had all shades of people engaging in all types of slavery throughout the history of mankind. And in fact, it was the most powerful country that led it into slavery. Well, that was also a violent colonizing country. It was Great Britain, right? And we don't have those kind of discussions in our museums anymore. It's just whitey bad, whitey need to pay reparations, right? So we're telling a whole generation of white kids, and we have been for years, not when we were children, right? When we were children, Quadell, it was just, hey, we're all equal. You need to treat people with respect. Equality is a good thing. That's it. But that's no longer what's being taught at the Smithsonian or at any college campus on this country or just about anywhere when you're talking about it. It is, if you are born white, you are born wrong. You're born with a privilege that subjects you to being discriminated against. And you've got to hear it all the time about how awful you and your ancestors are, when in fact, there's a very good chance that there's an overwhelming chance that your ancestors never had a slave. And there's a pretty good chance that the majority of your ancestors were never racist. But what we do is we look at the worst of the whites, right? But we say, hey, only for the whites. You can't do that to anyone else, because we can't say today, right? You can't say, well, it would probably be better for me to live in a, what are the safest states in this country? Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Idaho.
Let me say this.
Oh, wait, the whitest states in this country are the safest. So you could say, oh, well, I got to go live around the white people. But that would be, of course, racist, and you wouldn't have any seasoning in your food, right?
Let's focus on Jillian Michaels.
Oh, okay.
Miss Michaels is attempting to whitewash her
Absolutely
original
not. She's not even white.
Her original comments were absolutely offensive, and they were wrong. But I say that America has to come to grips with her history. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History, said, today was built from yesterday, and tomorrow is built to determine what we do today. We cannot move forward into the future without acknowledging and being honest about the things of the past.
Well,
But
when hasn't it not been
the
acknowledged in your lifetime,
the
Quadell?
Trump
When in your
administration,
lifetime has it not been
the Trump,
acknowledged?
the Trump administration is not only going after the Smithsonian, they're also going after what we know to be the African American Museum, and they're attempting to rewrite history and whitewash history. One
How
thing
so?
America has never
How so?
acknowledged
It's easy to say.
is
It's harder to
it's
tell.
never acknowledged the fact, let me finish, never acknowledged the fact that America paid reparations to slave owners for the loss of their slaves and called it property damage paid reparations. America has not acknowledged the fact that she never gave us what was written as a constitutional protection to us and lied to us about giving us 40 acres and a mule after slavery. That debt was never paid. America has lied to the American people and its own children about the illegal experimentations carried out on Black children in society, in schools, in orphanages, in jails, and in the military against Black people for generations. America has not been honest about the institutions that were financially built
If America hasn't been honest about it, how do you know about it?
off the backs of slavery, because some of us who were taught to read other material than what was given to us in school, we had to research this and fact find this to get to the bottom of this.
But now the truth
So,
is that America has
I
been,
find
especially
it- I
white
find it
America,
ironic
has been engaged
that
in
with
this
you-
self-flagellation
would
for
you-
decades now.
Would you tell Jewish people the same thing you tell Black people?
That's it for the Face Off on Fox Soul. We'll catch you next time.